Today I'm sharing an update on my Perpetual beef bone broth. We're on batch 4. Is it gelatinous or not? Let's find out together. Hi sweet friends, I'm Mary and welcome to Mary's Nest. I'm a former New York City girl, but now I live the simple life with my sweet husband here in the Texas Hill Country. And this channel is all about cooking from scratch, living naturally, and creating a cozy home. So if you're like me and you want to live the simple life, no matter where you live, be sure to subscribe to my channel and don't forget to click on the little notification bell below, which will let you know every time I upload a new video. Well, if you've been following along with this Perpetual beef bone series, you know that I've been trying different combinations of bones to find which combinations create the most gelatinous broth for the most batches. It was a little hard to get that all out in one sentence. And in my last video, I shared with you that I was able to get a gelatinous broth, gelatinous bone broth, on my third batch. And the combination involved oxtails. So that seemed to be the key. Now I'm going to go over with you all the different combinations I tried. I actually had to start a notebook. But the oxtails seem to really be able to, there's so much cartilage in them that they seem to be able to withstand multiple batches of simmering to provide multiple batches of gelatinous bone broth, which is nice because oxtails, you know, as we've all discussed, are a little pricey. So if we're going to use oxtails, we want to make sure that we're going to get our money's worth. Now, this is an oxtail. It's all fallen apart at this point. But I will tell you, when this went in to create the third batch, which I showed you in the previous video, and I'll link to all these videos in the iCards and in the description below so you can follow along or catch up if you've not had a chance to see them yet. But this still had some life to it when I put it in to make the third batch. So I felt somewhat confident that I would get a gelatinous broth out of that third batch. And I had more than one oxtail, and altogether it was pretty substantial, at least about 4 inches worth if you had stacked them on top of each other. So there was a lot of cartilage in that. And I experimented, and I made, I'm going to have to get out my notebook here so I know the combinations that I did. But I used a traditional combination that when you look at a lot of recipes for bone broth, they often use Shanks. But as I've shared with you, and I did that for these experiments, I don't use Shanks a lot unless I can get them on sale because they can be a little expensive. And then with the oxtails, you know, the price just starts, you know, ratcheting up. But for this combination, I wanted to use them just to see how long I could get a gelatinous bone broth. And I used Shanks, so those were the meaty bones, to be able to brown in the oven and get some good color on them, and then deglaze that and put it into the slow cooker, deglaze the pan, you know, and put all the liquid into the slow cooker so I'd get a nice rich brown color as well as good flavor. So I did Shanks, Marrows, and oxtails. That was very successful, and that's what I was able, and I believe it's because of the nice big chunky oxtails, to get 3 batches of gelatinous broth. Now, I was only simmering them each batch for 12 hours, and I made sure to, other than the initial batch of bringing it up to a boil so that I could skim the foam off the top, which just comes from, you know, cooking bones that haven't been cooked because of the marrow bones that are in there. So the first batch I just brought to a boil. And let me just go back because I don't want to confuse you. The marrows I don't roast in the oven. I just put those into the acidulated water and let them soak for an hour in the slow cooker while the Shanks and whatever other meaty bones I'm using are roasting in the oven. So the Shanks and the oxtails were roasting in the oven and the marrow bones were soaking in the acidulated water. So as I said, I had the Shanks, the marrows, and the oxtails, and that's when I was able to get 3 batches of gelatinous bone broth. This is the 4th, we'll see how it is, but I think it's going to be watery because when this oxtail and the other ones came out of the 3rd batch, they looked pretty used, but I figured, you know, let's experiment, let's see what happens. The other combinations I did were shanks, marrows, and neck bones. You know, I like neck bones very much because they're reasonable and they have a little bit of everything. And those, I was basically pretty much able to get 2 batches of bone broth. But again, you know, because those shanks are a little pricey, I don't know if that's a combination that I would repeat. The shanks, marrows, and neck bones, because often I like to use the neck bones in place of the shanks, but I just wanted to see how that combination would work. And then I also had shanks, marrows, and knuckles, and that was the same thing. Got about 2 batches of gelatinous broth, and then after that it just started getting watery. And shanks, marrows, and patellas, which the patellas, that's the kneecap, and that's got a lot of, you know, cartilage on it, and that also, though, 2 batches of gelatinous bone broth. And something that I want to mention, because you're going to notice this is very dark, I did rebrown the meaty bones, the oxtails, the shanks, the neck bones, whatever had meat on them. I did rebrown them before I made each batch. And I also did something I don't normally do with my first batch. And I did put in fresh vegetables with each batch. I did brown the vegetables for the second batches and the third batches and this fourth batch in the oven along with the meat, so that that would help bring some color and flavor to future batches of bone broth, because I was in a situation where I had, you know, meat that was kind of falling apart and I didn't know how well it was going to brown up and so on and so forth. So that's why, if you're wondering, you know, where the good color came from, that's because I was also browning the vegetables. So these are a lot of combinations for you, but don't worry. As I just review these quickly, I'll tell you exactly, you know, what I think is a good batch and one that's affordable. And then in a future video, I'll break it all down. I've got to do all the math and actually figure out how much each batch cost in comparison to, you know, what you might be able to buy at the grocery store. Alrighty, so that was my experiment with the shanks. Basically, the bottom line is that with the shanks and the marrow bones, and then depending what cartilage-rich bone you put in, whether neck bones, knuckles, or patellas, you're probably going to get about 2 batches. And if you throw in oxtails in place of those other cartilage-rich bones, the neck bones, the knuckles, the patellas, instead go with oxtail, shanks, and marrows, you might get 3. That's what I got. I got 3, and we'll see how this is. But the other combinations that I liked were, when what I normally like to do is use the neck bones instead of the shanks, because they're a lot more reasonable. So I did neck bones, marrows, and oxtails. And that really worked out the same way as the one with the shanks. I was able to get 3 batches, and I actually think the third batch was almost a little better than with just the shanks, because the neck bones offer some cartilage as well. So I like that combination: neck bones, marrows, and oxtails. And I'll be interested when I do the math to work that out and see exactly what that cost per batch. And then the other combinations I did were neck bones, marrows, and knuckles, and that you can get about 2 batches. It seems like those oxtails, they're just like the magic ingredient. And then neck bones, marrows, and patellas. And you know, the patellas and the knuckles, even though they come from different parts of the cow's body, they have a good amount of cartilage, but you know, it broke down pretty quickly. And so those I was able to get 2 batches, but not a third. And if you notice, and I'll link to it, I was also dehydrating bone broth because I had so much and I wanted to see if it was doable. That worked like a charm, and I really like it. But I learned something. I was kind of silly in a way, because I heated it and then I put it on like the little fruit roll-up trays to dehydrate it. And then people were saying you could just put the gelatinous matter when it's cold on it and dehydrate it like that, which made complete sense, and it'd probably be a lot easier. But I'll link to that video if you're interested in dehydrating the bone broth. But I'm going to do another one where I start with it cold in its gelatinous state. And that might be a little easier than trying to have a real steady hand with the liquid bone broth. Alrighty, so that's that. Okay. And then another combination I tried was just neck bones and marrow bones. That was pretty good. You know, the second batch, you know, now when I say gelatinous, there's different levels of gelatinousness. That word always makes me laugh because I don't think it's a real word. But just the neck bones and the marrows. The first batch was nicely gelatinous. The second batch was gelatinous, but not, you know, a little looser gelatin, not as thick as the first batch. And then the oxtails, just oxtails and just marrows, I was able to get 3 batches of gelatinous bone broth. But again, that third batch was with just the oxtails and the marrows. It's a little looser gelatin. Then what I thought to try, because they, you know, got a good amount of cartilage on them, were just the patellas and the knuckles. And that you can get two batches of gelatinous bone broth. But after the second batch, I didn't even try a third batch because it looked like all of the cartilage had just completely melted away, disintegrated, whatever you want to say. And they looked very, you know, I sometimes use the word that they looked spent, and some people have been asking me what I mean by that. It's just they just look very used up. So I didn't try a third batch with that. But the problem with just doing patellas and knuckles is getting some good color. So because when you roast those, you know, they don't really get brown like the meaty bones do. So there you really have to roast the vegetables if you want to get some deep, you know, beef bone looking color. So that's the only drawback. But I was able to get about 2 batches of gelatinous bone broth from that. And then what I did, I added the neck bones with the patellas and the knuckles just for the color and the flavor. And that worked well. And that I was able to get 2 batches. And then once I did the patellas, the knuckles, and the oxtails have some meat, so those I used as browning, for browning, as well as for the cartilage that they offer. And that was able to get 3 batches. And some, when I say 3 batches, you know, as I said, the first batch is always beautifully gelatinous. The second batch can be, you know, pretty good too. And 1 or 2 of the combinations, where the oxtails were involved, the third batch was quite good. And I think if you go back and look at my previous video, which is the update number 1, it was quite gelatinous. So that's sort of the secret ingredient. But I think all things considered, my favorite combination is to do the neck bones, and I think I said this earlier, the neck bones, the marrows, and the oxtails, and just get about 4 inches worth of oxtails, depending, you know, sometimes you might get it from your butcher and there's just one big one like that. Sometimes you have to get it, they're cut thinner and you have to stack them up. But you want the oxtails that are from the higher part of the tail, not the tip of the tail. When I say, you know, about 4 inches, you want the oxtails that are, you know, about 3 inches or so in diameter. The little pieces, the very tips of the tail, certainly you can throw those in, but they're not going to give you the same result as if you have a nice, good chunk of oxtail. So I'm just going to cut through this. Oh, and I can see, yeah, this is going to be watery. I'm just going to cut through this tallow. Oh, this is beautiful. I love tallow. And I do save it. I know a lot of you have asked me, why do you remove it from the bone broth? We just like to drink the bone broth defatted, but I always save the tallow, and I use it to cook with. All righty. Woo! Oh dear. I'm losing that one. Well, so as you can see, this is very watery. Now, something I want to say, don't lose heart. Even if, you know, as you're perfecting and learning how to make bone broth and getting to that temperature just right so that the gelatin doesn't break, even if it's your first batch is not gelatinous, or in this case, the fourth batch, there's still nutrition in this. So I'm going to use this as soup bases and whatnot. I'm not going to discard this. But as you'll see, yeah, and that's kind of what I thought, that the oxtail, and I'm sure the marrow bones at that point had pretty much given up everything all the collagen they were going to be able to give up. So I think that when we talk perpetual, we really mean maximum, and I'm being very generous, maximum 3 batches. I think realistically, depending on what combination of bones you have, perpetual is going to be more like 2 batches. But if you've got some oxtails in there, I think you can go 3 batches, as long as you don't boil, you know, if the first batch you bring up to a boil, but then get it right down to simmer. And if you're doing it on the stove top, make sure that you just move it to another burner if you have a glass top or an electric cooktop that doesn't lower the heat immediately like a gas range. So that's the big thing. And then letting it simmer for 12 hours, really. And when I say simmer, what you're looking for is just blip, 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 really a slow simmer that keeps it at that 180 degrees and allows the collagen to be released from the marrow bones, and allows the collagen to be released from your high cartilage bones. And that I always think of kind of melting, because you can actually see the cartilage. And that is the secret. Having some oxtails and cooking it slow and low for 12 hours. Now, all of that said, some of you have told me that you have been able to find feet, cow's feet. And it was the people who had found cow's feet that told me they were able to get 12 batches of bone broth out of their, the supply that they were making, because they were using cow's feet. And I find this fantastic, so I'm on the hunt for them now. Because if you can get 12 batches, that is truly perpetual bone broth. But with what I have available to me, and maybe what you have available to you, I think we can at least be looking at 2 or 3 batches. And now, the next video in this series will be breaking all of this down price-wise. And then I'm going to get some at the grocery store, and because it's pressure canned and it's in jars, and I'm going to see if it gels in my fridge. I don't think it's going to. And so for me, being able to make it home, and first of all, you know me, I love everything homemade. For me, if I can make it homemade and I get a nice gelatinous broth, and I break it down so that it's comparable to what a jar would cost at the grocery store, that's a good thing. And even if it's a little more than what I could buy at the grocery store, I would still lean to homemade, because I think the quality is much better. So I don't feel you're necessarily comparing apples to apples. And so I feel the homemade is better, but we just need to know going forward exactly what each batch is going to cost us. And that's what I'll do in a follow-up video. If you'd like to know more about beef bone broth, be sure to subscribe to my channel, and then click on this video over here, where I've got a short playlist all about my Perpetual Bone Broth series. And I'll see you over there in my Texas Hill Country kitchen. Love and God bless.